Okay, perfect. Thank you. So let's start. Well, before we do, I hope that you are doing well and enjoying the conference. First of all, thank you for joining me today. And I would also like to thank you, the organizer, for making this conference possible and bringing more than 600 trade users together. So congratulations. I just can't imagine all the effort and work that you have to put into this. Let's start with some presentations. My name is Angelica Bufa. I am from Montevideo, Uruguay. I am the co-founder of a registered partner in Uruguay, Modelit, and I am also the CTO. I've been part of the Salesforce ecosystem for almost 15 years now. I am Salesforce MVP, and I am also the leader of the administrative groups in Montevideo, Uruguay. Thanks to the sponsors that made this conference possible. And well, that was my intro. And for the agenda today, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be talking about some basic concepts about what is to be an architect and some aspects of communications. And then we're going to deep dive into some fundamentals of communications, principles, strategies that will set you for success. And then we're going to dive into how you can craft and communicate a solution being an architect. So let's start with the role of an architect. Here you have a definition that it comes from the Salesforce Architects blog. If you haven't heard about it, I highly recommend that you pay a visit to it. You're going to find the resources at the end of this presentation. So an architect is or helps design and deliver solutions for enterprise-grade customers using Salesforce products. And I'd like to highlight actually three aspects of what being an architect is. There are more, but these are the three that I like. They are expert, and they are technical experts, not on everything, sometimes just on a vertical industry or maybe a cloud, but they truly understand and know that portion of the Salesforce ecosystem. Then they fill the gap between business and the tech team. They are capable of understanding each part and then translating what each part is saying for the success of the project. And then they build trust in their leadership. And why is that? Because they provide these decisions and guidance to help their teams make good choices. They ensure the team has what they need to success, and they are also able to navigate assumptions, constraints, and expected outcomes. So that's the reason why they build trust and they are good leaders. So let's review the concept of communication. These two definitions come from the Oxford Languages Dictionary: the imparting or exchanging of information or news, the successful conveying or sharing of ideas and feeling. And I want you to keep two important takeaways from here. It's imparting or exchanging information and successful conveying of sharing that information. So here's this small diagram that summarizes all the different stakeholders or items that are involved in the communication process. We have the sender, the people that initiates the communication by sending a message that will or has to be delivered to the receiver. In the middle, there are two processes that happen: encoding and decoding the message. There is the channel and transmission. I am not going to get into the details because otherwise this will take forever. But I want you to keep this in mind because now we're going to be talking about the problem of communication. And I like to use this phrase from William H. White: the great enemy of communication we find is the illusion of it. And what do we mean by this? There's nothing worse than when you assume that you are sending a clear message and the receiver is getting it. However, that is not the key. That is not what is happening. And the worst thing is when you don't realize about that. And how you can start realizing that you have a communication issue. One, for instance, you start having troubles or miscommunications, and you start your explanations by saying things like, oh, but I assume that you understood, or it wasn't an email, or maybe they told me, or they were part of the meeting, or it's written somewhere down, like on an internet or whatever tool you're using to track notes. That's when you start realizing that maybe the message that you're sending is not clear, maybe it's about the tone, the strategy, the channel, or things like that. So now that we understand the problem, you may wonder why communication is so important. And what happened is that when you start becoming an architect, the ability to explain concepts and communicate them well becomes a key. And that is because you have to justify your decisions, provide recommendations regarding, for example, how to solve a problem, how you can surface risk, unblock or empower your team. And you are going to be doing that to different stakeholders. So you are here in the middle, and these represent all stakeholders. And what is a stakeholder? They are people, groups, organizations that are very involved in a software project. They influence it due to their position, and what they want may be affected by the success or failure of the project. So that's the reason why communication is so important, because you need to address the communication with different stakeholders. Each stakeholder may have different or be expert on different areas, so you need to ensure that you're using the right tone, the right strategy, so they can understand you. Okay, so what is about stakeholders, or who can be our stakeholders? Developers, testers, business leaders, expert on topics, project management, Scrum masters. And what do? They provide input, they give us information. So they really need to understand our message, and we need to understand their message. They have needs, they have goals, and they have sometimes opposite visions, and that can cause friction, and you have to be able to address them the right way. So now let's start with some communication fundamentals. This is based on the chapter 2 of a book that I got introduced to when I was in school. Is Essential Skills for Software Architects by Erik Hendriksen. I really like that, and if you don't know it, it could be a good reading for you if you're trying to become an architect. So the communication fundamentals for architects are pretty much based on 3 things: principles first, strategies then, and then communication with executives. I'd like to rephrase that and say communication with stakeholders, because as an architect, you may just not talk only to executive, but to many people. So what are the communication principles? It's the things you have to learn in order to actually start developing your communication skills, because learning how to communicate well is not something that happens from one day to the next one. It takes time. It's an art that you have to master. So being aware of these principles will help you do that. So let's start with listen first and talk later. When you are talking to someone, it's very important that you pay attention to them and you try to understand their message. And in order to do that, you have to give enough time for them to convey their message. So wait for them to wrap up their ideas, and then you start asking questions. Don't interrupt. Also show them that you're paying attention. And how you do that: look at them, give sometimes body confirmation, for instance, that you're listening, like nodding, so you give them an idea that they are understanding you. What else? Then be there. Nowadays that some of us are working from home, it's very easy to get some distractions, and even if you're at the office, you might be thinking about a million things. But if you really need to be on a meeting, just ensure that you are there and avoid, for instance, multitasking. Concentrate. And for this, with your body language, I mean, sit in a straight position, look at the person, even if it's a virtual meeting, and stop like doing many things at the same time. This sometimes is one of the hardest things to achieve. Also, be positive. Remember that you're a problem solver, so your attitude matters. And what do I mean by that? You are a leader, people trust you, and every time you need to communicate a decision based it on facts. And there are two ways to actually communicate things, using an positive or a negative perspective. And when you're positive, it's always better. For instance, sometimes you are gonna work on a project and you have done something similar in the past, and you know that it's a pain because it's difficult. You need to address many risks, and sometimes we're very tempted to say, "Oh, I've done this in the past, and it was very painful, and we run into many problems." Avoid that. Instead of that, say it or rephrase it in a more positive way, like, in order to achieve or be successful, what we need is to, I don't know, allocate these resources. We need to contemplate this risk and things like that. So that will it's much better to listen from the stakeholder perspective than just sharing things. Then, apologize early. What do we mean by that? Sometimes we make an early recommendation, but then we realize that that wasn't the right one. And instead of trying to hide that, just acknowledge the error and say things like, "I'm sorry I made this recommendation, but then I realized it's not the correct one and explain your reasons." This happens a lot in Salesforce because you are because the ecosystem is huge, and sometimes it's not possible for us to be sure of or know everything. So when you are in a meeting and discovery session, it's okay for you to say, "Well, you know what? I am not 100% sure about this, but I will find it out for you, and then I get back to you." So these are the communication principles that you have to start practicing every day. And in my journey as an architect, these are very important or very useful for me. Then we have the communication strategies. These are the strategies that you can use to show that you have a consistent and effective communication style. And here I want to make a note. You don't have to always use the same communication strategy, but what matters is for you to find the right one for your audience and one that you feel comfortable with. And of course, since we are going to interact with different stakeholders, we might have to switch from one communication strategy to another one to best suit the communication with that specific stakeholders. And also, mastering the communication art is something that takes works on a daily basis. So when you have to do that, you can improve day by day, and you can introduce minor changes to the strategy that you pick. But let's start with prefer yes over no's. It's kind of related to what we were saying before about being positive. Again, you are going to be consulted to, decide whether a project is feasible or not. And when that happens, we are very tempted to say no because it's going to be painful. It's going to take too much time. Instead of saying that this, again, rephrase it and say, yes, this is possible, but you need to consider these constraints, limitation, extra budget, extra resources. And then you are deferring the responsibility to saying, well, you know what, we're going to continue with this project or not, to the stakeholder, instead of you being the one that says no. Because what happened with no's is that you have to reserve them for very special occasions. And what are those special occasions? For instance, when you're being asked to do something that violates, I don't know, policies, the law, regulations, the priority, a deadline. So you really need to save your no's for very strong and important occasions. Then, here's suggestions as collaborative improvements. Don't make conversations personal. Everything that is said in the context of a project is for the good performance of that project. So just take the feedback in a good way. Sorry, there's a typo there, I have to fix it. Learn others' interaction styles, including your own. What happens again is that you're going to be talking to multiple or different stakeholders. So what you have to do is to learn how to read the person. And that is very important, because that by reading the person, you get to know them. And when that happens, what you will be able to do, you're going to be able to understand when is the right moment to, for instance, make a request, make a decision, ask for something that you need for your project. And then finally, but not least important, be prepared to think on your feet. When you are in meetings, you have to be constantly switching context sometimes. So you're going to be talking about one thing, and then the stakeholder is going to switch and start talking about a very different other thing. So you need to learn how you can keep what's important, and then remember that or take a note, and then be ready to start getting into what is right in front of you that can be a completely different story than what you were talking like 2 minutes ago. Sorry guys, can you please give me just a second? Okay, so sorry about that. So again, context switching is very, very important to be prepared to do that. Now, about communication with the stakeholders, they really like to work with people that they can trust, and they are loyal and they are consistent. So how can you do that? Again, pick a communication strategy and be consistent, be clear, don't talk about many things, just go right to the point. Address errors thoroughly, as we were discussing a few minutes before. And when you present information, present facts, not personal opinions, and ensure that that information can be reproduced in front of any kind of stakeholders, except for very confidential information that sometimes only some stakeholders have access to it. Prefer clarity over completeness. As a very technical person, that is something that I run into very frequently. I tend to get carried away and share all the information with the stakeholder. So I really need to focus on just giving what they really need to understand my message, and ensure it's clear, and not giving all the full picture with, I don't know, many technical information that they might not need or are not interested in knowing. And then avoiding surprising executives. What happens sometimes, we have to tell bad news, or we have to make a request. So don't leave things that have to be escalated for the last minute, because executives or stakeholders, sorry, in general, do not like to be surprised, and especially when that surprise, in order to be addressed, requires an immediate action by the stakeholders. They are busy people, they have a calendar, so if you start like adding things that have to be done for yesterday, they are not gonna like it. And also, problems or risk start appearing slowly. So if you start the conversation, or you communicate the actions that have to be done in order to resolve them right away, that is also gonna build your trustworthiness with the stakeholder. So that's about the communication. Now let's talk more about communication for architects. And this section right here is based on the framework proposed by Seth Dobbs. Also, the references are at the end. It's something that I really like doing when I have to communicate a solution. So there are 4 steps. The first one is research, then qualify, solve, and present the solution. What do we mean by research? You really need to understand the true problem statement. Sometimes the stakeholders will come with partial information or contradicting information. So you have to listen to them. You have to ask them to actually find the actual problem statement. And here we go back to listen first, talk later, be there. These are some principles that are going to be super helpful when you are at the research phase. Then we need to qualify. And what is qualify? We need to ensure that we understand the problem. So here it's about the communication skills, about the dialogue, how you can, ensure that you're understanding their message and how they understand yours. And one thing that I find super useful when I have to qualify is reading back my understanding to the group of people that I am talking to. So for instance, when they share some important concept, I'll like to tell them, okay, let me repeat back to you to ensure that I am understanding you. Or you can say other things like, in summary, what you need is 3 things, A, B, and C. And by doing that, you ensure that you understand, and it's very useful, especially when there isn't an understanding, because they're going to repeat, they're going to give you more information. And again, this contributes to build your trust by demonstrating listening skills, understanding of needs, and you verify key assumptions and constraints before diving into the solution. It's very important that you're not scared of asking things. So the kind of questions that you want to do at this qualification stage is questions to ensure that others are understanding you, and questions for you to understand other people. So this is a very important phase, because this is when you are gonna clarify any disagreements and assumptions and constraints, and that is the main cause of problems at later stages of the project. Then solving, and what do we have to do by solving? It's actually try to solve the problem that you identify, and it's very important that you hold off to committing to solutions too early in the process. Avoid the early satisfaction that gives to a person to communicate a solution at a very early stage. That doesn't mean that you don't have to be thinking about the solution. Just hold on until you have all the information to actually share the solution. How can you do this? Well, first start with a problem statement, then define a hypothesis with a possible solution. Don't try to convince your audience that the hypothesis is correct. Then start asking questions that will prove it wrong or it will prove it correct. Based on that, you will have the information that you need in order to solve the problem. And finally, but not least important, you have to present. And how you can present? Well, I always like to start by presenting the problem. Then I do a recap of the project itself with the goals, the constraints, the limitations, and then we present the solution. And sometimes it's not just one solution. Maybe you have to present some alternatives that may consider one constraint or one limitation. So then it's for the stakeholder to decide what's the one that they prefer. Of course, you can always give your recommendation. This would be my preferred solution, but based on, I don't know, all the constraints and the limitations that we have to consider, then they can pick their right one. And how you can give a presentation? Well, there are 4 steps. You have to frame your story. That is about to defining what content you are about to present, or the concept, sorry. You have to create a draft or a script, and especially don't try to cover too much. Remember, be clear, be consistent. Just include the key items and not try to cover every single detail, because you are gonna give too much information and you are gonna lose your audience, and you want the audience to keep engaged with you. Then plan your delivery. I mean, how are you going to present? You can read from a script. I don't recommend it. People tend to realize about that, and it's like, oh, this person is reading to me. Then this meeting could have been like an email, not a presentation. You can memorize it. I also don't like that approach. And you can use a supporting deck. So my preferred recommendation is use a supporting deck, and then maybe, having a script where you try to remember the key points, and that's the presentation strategy that I always use. Then develop stage presence. Don't think that this is only important when you are in person, meeting in person. Then when you are working with a virtual session, that also matters because it's about the body language that you are using, having a clean and tidy environment where you're going to be presenting, things like that. So it's very important that you consider those items when you're presenting, and then practice. And I think this is kind of self-explanatory. You have to practice screen sharing, interaction with the audience, the pacing of your presentation style, ensure that you're going to finish on time. So just to wrap up, some presenting tips. You have to understand your audience. That is very important because based on that, it will depend on the tone and the language that you are going to be using. Technical, more technical, less technical, more information, less information. Keep it simple. Just include the key items. Don't try to cover everything or you're going to lose the momentum. Give the minimum amount of information that you need. Use your typography and images wisely. Keep them consistent. Ensure that you don't have typos. Connect with your audience when you're in person. Try to make eye contact. Look at them, ask questions. Appear confident and receptive. You are an expert. Stakeholders want to trust you. You are going to be their leader. So ensure that you show those skills while presenting. Keep your body language under control. We already talked about that. Use different communication styles. Remember, you're going to be working with different stakeholders, so choose the right communication style that best suits or facilitates the communication with that particular stakeholder. If you're talking to developers, you can be super technical. If you're talking to business, avoid technical language. And then set your tone is pretty much on the same tone of the recommendation I just gave you before. So here you have the references, and that is pretty much all I wanted to share with you guys. I don't know if you have any questions for me. If not, we have 2 minutes and we can do the raffle. All right, let me share